Hey, everybody. Nice to see you all. A big thank you to the United Justice Coalition, the UJC Summit, Planning Committee, Team Rock Nation, for bringing together all of these great leaders and activists and educators and experts. And of course, we thank all the organizations who are here as well today, who are working for justice and for equity. And also, I've met a lot of my sorors today from Delta Sigma Theta, so yeah, nice to see you guys. Nice to see you guys. So let's get going. Efforts for reform, you know, are constantly taking place at the local and the state and federal levels. And so our next guests are going to address the issues of criminal justice from their unique vantage points. Satana Deberry is the elected district attorney for Durham County, North Carolina. As district attorney, she has prioritized the prosecution of serious offenses, implemented policies to reduce unnecessary pretrial incarceration, and worked to improve trust and equity. Keith Ellison has served as Attorney General of Minnesota since 2018 and served as the lead prosecutor of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Attorney General Ellison, come on out. And Hakeem Jeffries represents the 85th District of New York. He's a member of the Democratic leadership as chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. Please give a big round of applause for my panelists today.
Mr. Chairman.
So as you guys on this panel know, but I don't know that many folks in the audience know change, reform, especially criminal justice reform, moves at times at a glacial pace. And often you'll meet people who say, well, you know, why doesn't the president just do something? Why isn't Joe Biden just doing something? And obviously that is not a thing that happens sort of singularly, that the president can just do that. So I want you to each talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions that are that you see about the executive branch, about the power that you have in your own offices, and how that pertains to criminal justice issues. Satana, why don't you start for me?
Great, thanks, Soledad. So we talk about why doesn't the president do anything, but the federal government has a very small role in the criminal legal system, as most of you know. In my jurisdiction, I have a U.S. attorney who's responsible for 30 counties, and she has maybe 900 to 1,000 cases a year. I'm responsible for one county in that 30-county jurisdiction, and I have 30,000 cases a year. So the vast majority of criminal cases are happening at the state level. So that means who your DA is, who your Commonwealth attorney, your state's attorney is. That is the person who is driving criminal justice policy in your community, who is driving who goes to prison, is driving who's on probation, much, much more so than the U.S. attorney or the president is.
Keith, why don't you take that?
Thanks. You know, one thing folks may not know is that attorneys general, state attorneys general, can be an important force in criminal justice reform. In a lot of states, not all, but many states, where you find that a case you think should be charged, where if there's a shooting or an officer-involved shooting that doesn't get charged, it might make sense for the activists to demand that the attorney general get involved. This can make a big difference. It is an independent investigation and prosecution, which is an alternative source of justice. In many places, the AG may not have original jurisdiction, but may well be able to pick up where when you don't see cases being charged out. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Mike Brown shooting in Missouri, I mean, actually the grand jury was mischarged and given wrong legal information for the grand jury to make a decision on. If that case would have been at the grand jury, at the attorney general level, maybe you could have seen a higher quality of justice emerge from that. So that's just an example. As you get out there and protest and push for a higher quality of justice, don't forget to call the attorney general into the picture. They may be a source of justice as well.
What are the misconceptions that you see?
Well, it's great to be here with these two distinguished panelists, and thank you to Rock Nation and all of the partners for convening this very important discussion. I think a lot of folks look at criminal justice reform and think about it often through the lens of what the federal government can do, which is both important but can paint a picture that doesn't lead to the type of comprehensive action that might otherwise be necessary to tackle the problem of mass incarceration in the United States of America. From a policy standpoint, the federal government, I believe, plays an outsized role in helping to shape an approach, an agenda that can have significant impact at the state and county level. But when you look at who actually is incarcerated, the overwhelming majority of individuals incarcerated in America are incarcerated at the state level or the county level as opposed to the federal level. Now we know when the failed war on drugs was first declared, that was in 1971. That was a president, Richard Nixon, who declared a war on drugs. At the time, in America, there were less than 300,000 people incarcerated in the country when Nixon made that declaration. Right now, there are about 2.3 million. Disproportionately Black and Latino, a significant number of those individuals incarcerated over the years for nonviolent drug offenses. Incarcerated more often than not at the state level or the county level, the local level, but it was a federal policy that was set in motion that had enormous consequences in terms of an approach. So now we find ourselves in a country where America incarcerates more people than any other country in the world, including China and Russia combined on a per capita basis. It's a stain on our democracy. But it does require an all-hands-on-deck approach to change the laws, not just at the federal level, where only about 175,000 or so people are incarcerated, but certainly on a state-by-state basis, which I know many of the criminal justice reform advocates are engaged in that very important work.
One thing that I think could be very helpful is to sort of deconstruct how you guys do your work, because of course the three of you represent government on different levels. So could you each give me an example of a specific incident or a specific case that you tackled dealing with a criminal justice issue? And maybe Attorney General Ellison, I'll start with you.
Well, as Attorney General, I got a number of criminal justice hats. One is that I'm on the pardon board. So myself, the governor, and the chief of the Supreme Court are the pardon board. People come in front of us, and we deal with cases. The other one is I'm a prosecutor. Much like County Attorney Deberry, we prosecute cases, but only when they're referred to us by the county. So everybody has heard of the George Floyd case. We prosecuted that case. And then we set up a conviction integrity unit where people come to our office and say, I'm innocent. We review their cases, and if so, we will bring a motion for a new trial for them or resentencing. And then we have a statewide expungement program, which is free. So there's a lot of different ways that we're impacting the criminal justice system. That's just the criminal part. We also sue we were the lead civil plaintiff in the opioid cases. And so there's a number of ways we engage. One case, just to pluck one out, was a young man who was accused of what really was a horrific murder. 11-year-old girl was doing her homework. Some guys were exchanging gunfire over some drug conflict. Bullet pierces the wall of the house, hits her, she dies. That's a crime most people want to see prosecuted, and it was, except there was one 16-year-old who got fingered who actually didn't have anything to do with it. He was interrogated for hours and hours without his mother, though he asked for her to show up time and time again. The co-defendant started putting it on him because rival gang members were dropping dimes on each other. And this kid ends up getting convicted. At the age of 16, his co-defendants were all adults. He gets a new trial because of the denial of his Miranda. Goes to trial again. His lawyer makes some decisions which I think are definitely questionable. Gets convicted again. But then then some folks from the Innocence Project, including Barry Scheck, looks at his case. Folks review the case. And he comes before me and the pardon board, and we commuted his sentence on the grounds that under the United States Supreme Court has found that brain development for people that age is simply not what it is for somebody 25 years old. 16-year-old can't they don't understand consequences the same as a 25-year-old person. The sutures in your skull don't even come together until you're about 25 years old. Anyway, on that grounds, we commuted his sentence, and now we're looking at whether we're going to fully pardon him. I think there's no evidence to support the conviction, but he's not pardoned just yet, but he may well be. His name is Mayan Burrell.
Great, thank you. District Attorney Deberry, how about for you? What is one singular case that you'd want to sort of walk people through?
Sure, so I am your on-the-ground prosecutor. Anything that happens in your community, where the police are charging, the police are arresting, those cases come to my office. So of those 30,000 cases, most of them are traffic tickets, believe it or not, right? Driving while your license is revoked. Very small number of them are violent crime. A much bigger number of them are nonviolent drug offenses. And so what we really want to be focused on in our community is the most serious and violent crimes. But we also want to be focused on, we've been talking all day about people who come home, all right? And so there are situations where somebody has to go to prison. If it's a violent crime, my hands are just tied. But that person is coming back to our community. And who do we want coming back to our community? And so I guess the case that I want to talk about is we have, in our jurisdiction, done a restorative justice case and a homicide. And so many of you know what restorative justice is, and we are trying to restore, it is victim-led, and we're really trying to not just hold the person accountable, but restore them to their community. In this particular case, it was a young man who had murdered his father. And his father was one of 8 children, and all of the kids talked about what a bully their dad was. And that he had, kind of constantly, his kid's whole life, just been degrading them and beating them up. And
then put the line in.
That's the voice of the Lord, who knew it was a woman. Carry on, District Attorney.
when you hear the voice of the Lord, you pause. And so he and his father had gotten into an argument over the PlayStation. They physically fought, and he stabbed his father. His father died. His father was caregiver for his 90-year-old mother, who was bedridden, was in the house at the time. And the young man fled, as would not surprise you, right? And then he heard on the news that his father had died. And he called the police, and he sat on the curb till they came to get him. He's covered in blood. Now, typically, you see something like this, and that is the person that you put under the jail, right? Because the police find him. He's covered in blood. The family wants revenge. But there was a brother in that family who's a pastor, voice of the Lord. And he said he stands up every day and talks about forgiveness and love. And here he was with this opportunity to provide forgiveness himself. And he wanted to put himself in his nephew's shoes. And what would it mean for him to never speak to his family again? And that was just the most horrible idea he had. And so he approached us about doing something else. And we've been doing restorative justice like every other community does it, on low-level things. And we had been looking for an opportunity to do it when it really mattered. And so this young man spent 6 years in pretrial detention, getting therapy, meeting with his family. It was organized through an outside organization that we work with, Restorative Justice Durham. And he entered a plea of voluntary manslaughter and was released from prison. But it took like 100 people in our community, not just people working on the restorative justice case, but people finding him a mentor, finding a place for him to transition to out of pretrial detention, because you can't sit in jail for 6 years and then just walk out on the street and expect to be successful. And so we are really proud of that case because it provides for us an opportunity to do something different and to see the humanity in the people in our community, and somebody who's coming back. There's nowhere else for him to go. His whole family's there. So.
Representative Jeffries, what does structural change look like to you, and is there a specific case that you'd want to walk us through?
Well, you know, as a member of the legislative branch, as opposed to being an executive, either as a DA or as the Attorney General, I think structural change for me, as a member of the House of Representatives, where I served with Keith Ellison and also Lisa Blunt, Rochester, who's with us here from Delaware. Shout out to LBR, carrying the clean slate bill that's very important, criminal justice reform. The way that we've always looked at policy is, let's look at injustice as it exists embedded in the system and figure out legislatively how we can address that injustice with the fierce urgency of now. And for me, being involved in the effort to get the First Step Act passed into law was really a labor of love during my third term in Congress, particularly because at that moment, Democrats weren't in the majority in the House or in the Senate, and the president before this one was in the Oval Office. And a lot of folks said to myself, Keith, Cedric Richmond, others, that just give up on criminal justice reform is not going to happen. And our view was, we've got to do our best to address this injustice because there are people who are behind the walls right now, without hope, suffering. They're on unjust sentences. And if some of my Republican colleagues are at least suggesting that they're open to the idea of reform, then we felt an obligation to pursue it. Now, when I first got to Congress, I was put on a task force on overcriminalization. And it was 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, so it was a bipartisan task force to deal with this problem in America. It was Republican-led, and then there was a Democratic co-chair. We had our first couple of hearings, and you know, some of the witnesses that showed up were like folks from the Koch brothers. I know the Koch brothers, right? Heritage Foundation. And what was interesting is that a lot of what folks were saying, there was a particular witness from the Heritage Foundation who was like, yeah, we have an overcriminalization problem in America. We've got to deal with that. It's a threat to liberty. And I found myself agreeing with everything that this particular witness was saying. And at first I'm like, am I being hustled right now? Turns out that for a variety of reasons, there were willing partners on the right to enter into this conversation. And then ultimately, it led, you know, to the passage of the First Step Act, the most significant criminal justice reform bill that Congress passed in a generation, that dramatically reformed the harsh drug laws that came out of the 80s and the 90s, rolled back mandatory minimums, elevated good time, strengthened compassionate release, made some of the changes to the crack cocaine, powder cocaine sentencing disparity retroactive. And as a result, a bill that was signed into law, of course, by the president preceding this one, and I'm trying to be kind and bipartisan, y'all. But, you know, had the support of the left and the right, progressives and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, you know, Reverend Sharpton and Grover Norquist, the NAACP, and the Heritage Foundation, all points in between. The most significant thing for me about that bill is that more than 25,000 people who would still be incarcerated today on harsh drug sentences are back in the community.
Wonderful.
Back in the community. Approximately 90% of them, black men. And the last point that I'd make on this, on individual cases, I can't point to an individual case as a legislator, but what always has moved me is when people come up, and I see them on the streets back home in Brooklyn, whether it's in Bed-Stuy or East New York, West End of Coney Island, and said, I'm out today with my family, making the best of the rest of my life because of what was done with the First Step Act.
Yeah, made a tremendous difference. So I want to jump to then.
Can I comment on
Of course you can, yeah.
real quick? And I don't want anybody to underestimate the power of policy making, right? Because Michael Eric Dyson was here this morning. Those of you who heard him talk about when you make laws, for them to be just, you have to not only see yourself as the person who prosecutes those laws, but as a person who may be prosecuted. And when somebody like Representative Jeffries and AG Ellison is leading that charge, they're leading it from a particular point of view. And that particular point of view is that they are people who may be prosecuted by those laws.
Could be.
So they understand at a molecular level, as we all do as black people, as they certainly do as black men, right? That these laws are meant to prosecute them. And so it's really important who's sitting in those seats making that policy.
And Soledad, if I could just comment real quickly. First of all, passing that bill with you and Lisa was one of the best things I ever did in Congress, and I want to thank you for your leadership on that. But I also want to say that, you were being pretty nice because you're a nice guy, but not everybody was with you. And I remember sitting on the House floor with you trying to convince people we shouldn't have to convince. Now, you're not going to, I don't suspect you're going to tell the full story.
Tell the full story.
Well, but says the journalist, right? But
And the nosy person on the panel.
But I just
Tell
want to
the
say,
story.
I just want to say there was this guy named Otto von Bismarck who said, if you want to enjoy laws or sausages, never watch either one being made. And definitely he was the leader of the sausage-making crew.
Well, you've teed up, can I ask you a question then? Because you've kind of teed up this idea of alliances, right? I mean, when you're mentioning the Heritage Foundation or the Kochs, you're talking about people who I think on 99.9996% of all other issues, you would not see eye to eye. So talk to me, and maybe you can start for me, like the messiness of the sausage making and the messiness of getting people who you might really just personally loathe to actually get together and figure out how to create policy and make real change.
Well, based on what's going on with the January 6th hearings, I can see why they want to do some prison reform. Having said that, it is a luxury. It is a luxury, folks. It's a luxury for somebody to say, I'm not going to sully my progressive credentials by working with those Republicans over there. Well, wait a minute.
There were lots of people who were very pissed off about that. I mean, let's be real. It was ugly.
Right. And your question is excellent because I hope, look, folks, it is easy to rage at the other side. You know what's hard? To go to your own people and say, we're wrong, and we got to change the way we do things. That's courage right there, to go to your folks and say, guys, Mr. Johnson has been in prison for 40 years, maybe for a crime that he didn't commit or some nonviolent offense, or, can we do something? Will you be willing to suspend your animosity toward the other side for Mr. Johnson's sake? Will you do that? Some people say, no. He says yes. Lisa says yes. I say yes. You can't, look, doing legislation is hard. I did it for 12 years. I went and got me a new job because it's very difficult. It takes a lot of patience, and I'm not talking about sitting around waiting. I'm talking about every single day going back to everybody, talking to people who some of your friends would be like, you talk to them? Yes, we do, for the sake of Mr. Johnson. So really, being a legislator is tough. Any of you all who are thinking about running for Congress, I want to recommend you definitely do it. But don't think that you're always going to be talking with people you agree with, because if you only talk with people you agree with, you will not get anything done. And so understand some of our ideological purity tests are keeping good people in prison.
That's correct, and I think it's especially important. Like, I'm a reform prosecutor. I got elected in a primarily Democratic jurisdiction. And so it is really important that we are having these discussions amongst ourselves, because sometimes we are the ones that stop. You would think, being elected in a Democratic jurisdiction, I'd be able to push forward whatever agenda I said I was going to push forward. And there are no Republicans to stop me. So when things don't happen, they're not happening because I have Republicans, right? And so you can't have any permanent enemies. And the perfect is the enemy of the good.
That's
Yep.
great. And just to give a little context, Soledad, about how we got to this
Come
point.
on.
Don't get in trouble, but
You can name names. I'm totally fine with that.
See, it's a good thing that Brother Keith is an attorney general, so he had my back. But
In Minnesota, though, so
that's right.
I'm just saying.
You know I got your back. I'm with
you,
you.
sis.
hey, ride or die, bro. You're in, I'm in. Whatever.
So we were working on criminal justice reform in 2015 and 2016. I'm in my second term. Cedric Richmond from Louisiana, another young member of Congress, were kind of charged with working with the Obama administration. Some of our allies on the outside groups, genuinely committed to getting something done in this space, where we had made some progress as one of President Obama's final legislative initiatives. He doesn't get credit for what he did in 2010, which was the Fair Sentencing Act that reduced the crack cocaine, powder cocaine. Ellison was there working on it, from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. Couldn't go further at that point in time and make it retroactive because of problems in the Senate. But that was one of President Obama's first pieces of legislation. So trying to close the loop, in 2016, we were working on criminal justice reform. So bipartisan conversations that were taking place that the president had convened. And some of our allies said, we're going to pull the plug on criminal justice reform because we think we can get a better agreement when Democrats are in control of the Senate after the 2016 election and Hillary Clinton is president. That's what was said, so the plug was pulled. And then we know what happened in 2016. So I come back in 2017, and some of my folks said, well, the new administration wants to talk to y'all about criminal justice reform. And the good news is there were great allies like Van Jones, Jessica, Families Against Mandatory Minimums on the outside, Mark Morial, Urban League. They thought this was a step that we should take, but then there are others who were skeptical. But I said to them, I said, how did this work out the last time? Because Hillary Clinton ain't president, and Democrats aren't in control of the Senate, but brothers and sisters are still in jail who could otherwise be out. And we made that decision. I think Jay-Z said once, I gave you prophecy on my first album, y'all all aimed out. We said, you made a decision, it was wrong, we're going to go in a different direction the second time around. And it was a tough decision to some degree because of who was in the White House at the time. But when they reached out, and one of my Republican colleagues said, Jared Kushner wants to meet in the White House on criminal justice reform. I said, I just can't go to the White House. And I didn't. I can't, because I didn't want a fake photo op. And we had seen that in other instances. I said, we want action. But I said, if he's willing to come to the House and have a conversation, I'm willing to have that conversation. And to his credit, he came as Republican Congressman there, Cedric Richmond, myself, and that is what began the dialogue around what ultimately led to the First Step Act.
Awesome. If you don't mind, Soledad, can we get a hand for that? That was good. So I just want to say, so like now, we would love to see the George Floyd Justice of Policing Act pass. And it's not passed. After we successfully prosecuted Derek Chauvin, I said, look, don't clap too loud because this is just one case. We need a bill passed. And what we're going to have to do, beloved, is we're going to have to talk to police organizations. We're going to have to find officers who want to see reform, together with people who desperately demand that there must be transformation, because I know some folks don't want to hear nothing about no reform. But we've got to come to that, because if you don't somehow get to a critical mass, we will all be calling for it and it won't happen. So, and it happens really, I mean, part of the reason we could do what we were doing is we had a mass of activists like you who came forward and said, we demand that this change. And so that gave the energy, but it is needed in this moment. We've got to pass the George Floyd Justice Policing Act. And I don't care if we get Republican votes to pass it, we've got to pass it. And so please lace up your sneakers, because we need you to push them to do it.
Let's dig into that some more, right? I want to talk about what civic activism, what civic engagement literally specifically looks like. Because we know a lot, the answer is you got to vote. And then there's a whole other bunch of people who are like, you know what, screw it, don't vote, which obviously seems like a really terrible idea. But I understand the frustration of people who feel like the answer is always vote. It doesn't seem like it's all that it could be. So what would you recommend, each of you, for civic engagement that actually moves the needle to get these things across the finish line?
Well, I mean, I am sitting here because people voted. I mean, there's no other way to put me in this seat, to put Rachel Rollins in that seat, to put Kim Fox in that seat. There is no other way to do that than the vote. I didn't just walk up to the office and sit down in a chair and declare myself district attorney, right? So voting matters. Organizing around voting matters. Voter education matters. But you know what also matters? Like, you can run, right? You can, doesn't matter if you have a criminal record, even in my job, right? If you got a law license, I mean, you probably can't get a law license, but you don't know. Some states you can, right? So you can sit on parole boards. You can sit on local government boards. These positions go unfilled every day. Every community has these boards that are advising the city council or the county commissions or the state legislature. Put yourself on one, right? Advocate for other people to be on one. I am not special, all right? And if I am special, I am not more special than you, all right? So you run, you get on boards and commissions, you raise your kids to do that, right? There's some of them in here, I guess, but that's what they do, whoever they is, right? Right? I mean, they raise, so you can be so impactful in your community. The activists and people came to me and asked me to run. Otherwise, I would be, living a much easier, more lucrative life. Right? So.
Well, I think voting is absolutely essential and important, but that's the beginning of a process, not the middle or the end of the process. Because, what you all do in terms of advocacy, informed, enlightened, intense, heartfelt, humane advocacy is what really takes the process from voting people into office, then holding them accountable to make sure they deliver the results that communities deserve. And that advocacy process is embedded in the Constitution in the First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the ability to protest, the right to petition your government. That's at the center of what our democracy, as fragile as it is all about. That's advocacy. And you better believe that if your voices aren't being heard in communicating with legislators, at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, that the voices, of the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected will fill that void. And so it's important to put people in office who share your values and then hold them accountable for bringing those values to life.
Absolutely.
Have you found ways to get people who are particularly cynical and disengaged, ways that work to get them engaged?
Yes.
What are they?
Direct door knocking, personal contact. Personal contact. If you run an ad, it probably costs you, in New York, I don't know what it costs in New York. In Minnesota, it costs you at least around $400,000 to run your ad so that everybody who watches TV sees it around 7 times. But people still forget it. But if you go, they've proven this statistically, but if you knock a door and actually talk to somebody, they will remember you much longer. So it's really a matter of direct engagement. Here's a question for all of y'all. Before 1965, when only about 1% of us black folks could vote, how did we do political engagement then? We protested. Martin Luther King never held elective office, ever. Neither did Rosa Parks. What's my point? You can be an effective advocate without being in office yourself, but you can make an enormous difference. But the real thing is on the ground organizing, writing letters to the editor, writing books, writing op-eds, doing journalistic stories, extremely important contribution to our black press before that time. And so all these things, I love to work with people to the point where voting is like, of course we're voting. If I got a relationship with Reverend Johnson and we're working on payday lenders and we're working on wage thieves and we're working on bad landlords, and then I come up around October, I say, Rev, y'all gonna vote for me? Like, of course we're gonna vote for you. We've been working together all along. Of course we're gonna vote for you. But if Reverend Joe never see me, and now I'm like, y'all voting for me? He looks at me like, oh yeah, it must be election time. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing, we've got to co-govern. We got to co-govern. And it's not just all on the electeds, folks. Some folks vote for me and they're like, go do a good job, we'll see you when you next time around. No, we need active citizenship, involvement, and checking in, talking a lot. When you elect somebody, you have elected yourself to tell them what to do. It's your job. And of course, they're gonna listen to everybody, not only you, but they're gonna listen to you too. And so this is the thing, grassroots, active involvement, high touch, de-emphasize the let me ask you this, do you like watching nasty attack ads on opponents? Does that bring you enjoyment? Nobody likes it. What's better, but it works. So what could work better? High touch, direct, personal engagement, planning what we're gonna do, doing it, and getting some things done, then you're gonna see voter turnout go way up.
Yeah, you can never underestimate the power of community organizing,
Yep.
right? Like, what did your grandma and your aunties do? They were on the missionary board. They were doing Sunday school.
Involved.
All of that is grassroots community organizing. They didn't call it that, but that's what they were doing, and that's what they were teaching other people to do. Right? When they're doing missionary work, when they're out doing this, the free lunch program, all of that stuff is community organizing. Now, I also want to say one more quick thing about being an advocate. Advocacy is important. I was an advocate for 20 years. I banged on a lot of doors of a lot of legislators, a lot of local government people. It is much better to be the person making the decision, right? Because you don't have to come knock on my door anymore, right? Like he said, I've been working with you. I know what we've been trying to do. So now I can just do it.
In our last couple of minutes left, I just want each of you to sum up. What do you want folks who are here the main message, what you want them to take away as they head forward, continuing in advocacy and really trying to make real change. Why don't you start me off, Representative?
Well, I think one important takeaway when you look at the intersection between public policy makers and advocates and activists is that we each have a lane. And the lane for the enlightened elected official is to fight hard, negotiate hard, legislate hard, pass a bill that meaningfully makes a difference on the issue that you care about in this space, criminal justice reform, and then live to fight another day. That's the legislator's job. The job of the enlightened activist is to be persistent, relentless, and dissatisfied until transformational change is brought about. And you're pushing the institutions in that way. But understand, that's always been the case. The civil rights activists of the 1960s were, initially dissatisfied that the Civil Rights Act was just the Civil Rights Act. It struck a blow against Jim Crow. But if you go back and look at the history, the original Civil Rights Act also had the Voting Rights Act in it and the 1968 Fair Housing Act in it. But because the moment didn't provide for being able to get everything at once, they didn't walk away. The legislators did their job, and the activists remained persistent, relentless, and dissatisfied.
It's a great point. A.G. Ellison.
Rock Nation, I'm so glad to be here with you guys because every one of you are seated in this chair or listening to this broadcast. It's evidence how much you care and how passionate you are. All of that is absolutely needed in this moment. You see the January 6th stuff. You see the climate changes. Your passionate involvement is so essential and necessary. What I ask for is that you remain hopeful and optimistic and counsel people who say voting don't matter, being involved don't matter. Counsel them to say if it didn't matter, why they try to take your vote away so hard? I mean, counsel them, talk to them, teach them. But stay involved and keep doing what you're doing. It's going to make a big difference, and we are at an essential moment right now.
Satana, you get the final word today.
I want to say ditto to all that, but I also, it's a cliche, but we are the ones we've been waiting for. Like, the power already exists inside you, right? If everybody in this room went out and organized, who knows what could come from this conference. The second thing I would say is it's not just me, and I was really reminded of when Representative Jeffries said, legislate hard. Like, we don't want him to kill himself. So train up somebody behind you. My mentee's sitting in the front row, right? I had the opportunity to bring a +1. I didn't bring my kid or my significant other. I brought the person who picks up after me. And so have somebody to pick up after you.
A big round of applause for our panelists and a big thank you to the United Justice Coalition. Really important conversations, and we're all looking forward to see what comes out of all of this power. Thank you guys, appreciate it.